The evening descended upon Ashcroft Manor with a quiet authority, as though the clouds themselves had been instructed to drape the estate in a cloak of silver mist. Lanterns lined the gravel paths, their flickering light reflecting off the wet cobblestones where the rain had left tiny mirrors of the fading day. From within the grand hall, the soft murmur of voices drifted outward, threaded with polite laughter, the subtle scraping of piano keys, and the distant tinkle of crystal glasses. Yet even amid such refinement, one figure moved conspicuously alone, her presence both luminous and precarious. Lady Evelyn Whitmore, scarcely 19, possessed a beauty that seemed at once effortless and deliberate, as though the heavens themselves had curated her features. Dark chestnut hair fell in glossy waves around her shoulders, framing a face delicate yet alive with subtle expressiveness, curved brows, full lips, and eyes that held a soft, searching light. Tonight she walked the gardens unchaperoned, an act that society deemed improper, yet one she could not resist, drawn by the freedom of the cool evening air and the faint scent of wet roses that perfumed the night. Her gown of ivory silk clung lightly at the waist before cascading to the ground, the hem brushing the cobblestones and gathering specks of mud with each careful step. The faintest rustle accompanied her movement, announcing her to the few discreet observers who had ventured into the garden. The whispers began almost immediately. At first, they were subtle, a barely perceptible stirring among the partygoers, a tilting of heads, a glance furtively exchanged between two ladies. "Unchaperoned at this hour," one voice murmured, soft yet sharp enough to sting if overheard. "How very bold, or perhaps careless," another offered, an edge of judgment coiled beneath the sweetness of her tone. Lady Evelyn felt their eyes like pricks against her skin, a simultaneous tug of embarrassment and defiance. Her cheeks warmed, yet she held her head high, willing herself to meet the evening with quiet dignity. Each whispered word, each sideways glance, only seemed to sharpen the fragile awareness that society's gaze could wound as surely as any sword. Across the garden, perched upon a marble balcony that overlooked the wet roses and glimmering lanterns, stood a figure whose attention was unlike the rest. The Duke of Ashcroft, 32, observed with a measured intensity that set him apart from the murmuring crowd. His countenance was composed, yet a subtle frown betrayed his irritation at the breach of etiquette. The black cut of his evening coat was sharply tailored, a ribbon of moonlight tracing along the polished edges. Beneath the surface of polite composure, his eyes, dark and discerning, tracked Lady Evelyn's every careful step. It was not mere curiosity that drew him, nor idle gossip. It was a sensation at once protective and incredulous. He could not comprehend why such a lady, radiant and unmistakably admired, would be left without guidance in a world that prized both virtue and appearance. The Duke descended from the balcony with deliberate steps, each click of his boots against the stones sounding like a subtle drumbeat, announcing his approach. Lady Evelyn, caught in the midst of adjusting her gloves, sensed the shift in the atmosphere before she saw him, a flutter of anticipation threading with a spike of anxiety. She turned, eyes widening at the sight of a man whose presence was at once commanding and yet not unkind. There was something magnetic about him, a gravity that drew attention without effort. His gaze met hers with an almost imperceptible scrutiny, the kind that seems to measure both character and circumstance simultaneously. "Why leave a lady this beautiful unchaperoned?" His voice, low and deliberate, rolled across the damp garden like a whispered accusation and a question, each word weighted with authority yet tempered by a strange tenderness. The question hung in the air, more than a mere observation. It was a summons, a recognition of her peril, and a subtle acknowledgment of her allure. Lady Evelyn felt a tremor of awareness pass through her, a mingling of fear, embarrassment, and a strange thrill at being so openly noted. Her lips parted, but no immediate reply came. The decorum she had been taught warred with the instincts that urged her to speak freely. Around them, the garden seemed to respond to the tension. A gust of wind stirred the roses, shaking droplets to the ground. Lanterns swayed, casting elongated shadows that danced across the stones like spectators in silent judgment. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blossoms, a heady perfume that seemed to magnify the moment. Each breath Lady Evelyn drew carried both the freshness of night and the suffocating weight of social expectation. She straightened, clasping her gloved hands together to steady the tremor that threatened her composure. The Duke approached, not hastily, but with a certainty that spoke of intention and control. He paused a few paces away, careful to maintain propriety yet close enough that the intimacy of shared space could not be ignored. "It is uncommon," he remarked, voice even, yet his tone carried the suggestion of concern, "for one such as yourself to wonder while the eyes of the world linger upon every misstep. Might I escort you?" Her initial impulse was to decline, to retreat into the thin comfort of independence, yet the words carried a weight that belied mere civility. In them she detected a promise, not of possession, but of protection, of recognition, of understanding. Her lips curved into a cautious, restrained smile, a fragile bridge across the divide of social expectation and private curiosity. "I should be most grateful, Your Grace," she answered, the formal title feeling both distant and intimate in the cadence of her tone. As he fell into step beside her, the whispers of society seemed to recede, replaced by the muted symphony of rain, distant piano keys, and the soft crunch of their footsteps against the garden path. The Duke's presence was at once reassuring and arresting. Each movement, each subtle glance, suggested both command and attentiveness, a careful negotiation between societal duty and personal regard. Lady Evelyn found herself acutely aware of every detail: the tilt of his shoulder, the measured cadence of his stride, the faint scent of his cologne, the assured ease with which he navigated the garden's wet stones. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, the acknowledgement that beauty alone did not shield one from the scrutiny and caprice of polite society. Yet alongside the apprehension lay a spark of exhilaration, a recognition that she was not merely seen, but truly observed, with a gaze that measured character as much as appearance. The tension between social expectation and personal desire, between shame and curiosity, wove around them like a delicate lattice, intricate and unavoidable. As they reached a wrought iron gate that marked the garden's exit, the Duke's hand lightly touched the small of her back, a gesture both protective and appropriately distant. Lady Evelyn's pulse quickened, and for a moment, the world beyond the garden faded. The whispers of society, the judgments, the careful navigation of reputation, all seemed to hinge on this single quiet interaction. Then, with a polite nod and a small measured bow, the Duke offered her arm. Lady Evelyn hesitated only briefly before placing her gloved hand upon it. The contact was fleeting, yet it carried with it the unspoken acknowledgement that their paths had irrevocably crossed. In the gentle sway of silk against tailored coat, in the soft rustle of leaves stirred by night air, and in the steady rhythm of shared steps, a new story began to unfold, a story of restraint, of curiosity, and of the fragile, formidable power of attention given where it was both dangerous and desirable. The garden, once a place of potential shame, became a stage for possibility. Each shadow and lantern flame a silent witness to the delicate dance of dignity and longing. As they moved toward the hall, the distant notes of music beckoning them back into society, Lady Evelyn could not help but sense that her life, her very understanding of freedom, reputation, and desire, was about to be transformed by the question that had cut through the night. Why leave a lady this beautiful unchaperoned? The words lingered in the damp evening air, echoing in her mind and marking the boundary between what had been and what might yet be. The first act of observation, of recognition, was complete, and with it, the stage was set for the slow-burning intricacies of scandal, longing, and the tentative stirrings of a connection that neither society nor decorum could easily extinguish. The Duke led Lady Evelyn through the garden's winding paths, their feet muffled by the damp gravel, the scent of wet earth mingling with the delicate perfume of roses that had survived the evening rain. Each step seemed measured, deliberate, as though the garden itself were a stage, and their movements a choreography dictated by propriety, curiosity, and the subtle undercurrent of something more intimate. Lady Evelyn kept her gaze demurely lowered, yet the corners of her eyes betrayed the flickers of attention she could not suppress. The encounter had already left an indelible mark upon her, a mixture of embarrassment and fascination that mingled like smoke in the night air. Once within the Duke's library, the transition from open garden to enclosed warmth was immediate and tactile. The heavy scent of polished wood and leather-bound tomes greeted them, the golden glow of firelight pooling in corners and casting shadows that danced across the room with a languid elegance. Lady Evelyn drew in a breath that carried both relief and trepidation. The space was intimate, yet the formalities of decorum were undiminished. The Duke motioned for her to a carved chair, its velvet cushion a vivid crimson against the dark oak. He remained standing, a figure of poised authority, yet his eyes lingered upon her with a consideration that was neither casual nor wholly formal. "I trust the garden did not vex you excessively?" he inquired, his voice a low cadence, measured but not without warmth. The question was a delicate balance, polite in construction yet weighted with an unspoken acknowledgment of the evening's earlier scrutiny. Lady Evelyn lifted her gaze, a hesitant smile brushing her lips. "It was invigorating, Your Grace," she murmured, the words formal, yet threaded with an honesty that could not be concealed. Her hands, gloved and clasped upon her lap, betrayed the faintest tremor, a subtle pulse of awareness that his presence evoked. The Duke approached a low table, upon which rested a small vase of freshly cut flowers. Selecting a single bloom with precise care, he presented it to her, a silent gesture that spoke of recognition, apology, and a curious invitation to intimacy. Lady Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, the delicacy of the act striking her as both unexpected and profoundly personal. She accepted the flower with hands that were steadier than she felt, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. The soft fragrance of the petals mingled with the warmth of the firelight, and for a brief, suspended moment, the room seemed removed from the rigid constraints of society. Yet even in this private chamber society's gaze, though imagined, loomed. Whispers had begun to weave their way through the halls of Ashcroft Manor, subtle but persistent. Servants who had glimpsed the garden encounter murmured quietly amongst themselves, and ladies at the ball speculated, delicately veiled in polite tones, about the meaning of such an intimate interaction between a young lady and the Duke. The potential for scandal, though not yet concrete, was a persistent shadow, and Lady Evelyn felt its presence like a soft weight upon her shoulders. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture of nervous composure, acutely aware that every movement could be interpreted. The Duke, perceptive and unhurried, seemed attuned to her every nuance. "Do not let the conjecture of others unsettle your evening," he said, his words carefully chosen, the inflection calm yet compelling. "The opinions of those who have never known your courage or wit are of little consequence to one such as you." There was a rare gentleness in his tone, a deliberate contrast to the formality of his words. Lady Evelyn felt the tension within her chest loosen slightly, replaced by a cautious warmth, a sensation she had seldom experienced in the presence of men of her acquaintance. Conversation flowed, measured yet intimate, navigating the careful terrain of propriety and curiosity. The Duke inquired about her studies, her tastes in literature, the small joys that colored her world beyond the strictures of etiquette. Each question was deliberate, a subtle test, not of knowledge alone, but of character, and Lady Evelyn responded with honesty tempered by her awareness of decorum. She discovered, with a quiet astonishment, that he listened, not merely to reply, but to understand, to witness the nuance of her thoughts, the delicate patterns of her mind. Amid the conversation, a sudden interruption arrived in the form of a servant bearing a small note. Lady Evelyn received it with polite surprise, breaking the thread of their discourse. The note contained a brief, elegant message, a request from the Duke to meet briefly in the drawing-room after the ball, an invitation framed with formality yet unmistakably personal. Her heart fluttered, a mingling of excitement and apprehension. The gesture was small, yet it carried an unmistakable implication. The world of society, with all its rigidities, could be momentarily suspended when they were alone. Their connection granted a quiet space to flourish. Time passed with the quiet rhythm of shared presence, punctuated by small gestures that deepened their unspoken understanding. The Duke's attentiveness, the careful way he guided conversation, the subtle tilt of his head, the occasional brief brush of gloved hands across a page or a cup of tea, each conveyed a language beyond words. Lady Evelyn began to understand that attraction could be expressed in restraint, in nuanced gestures, in the deliberate unfolding of moments that seemed ordinary yet were imbued with profound significance. The shadows lengthened as the evening wore on, and the distant strains of the ball reached their ears, a soft symphony of violins and laughter. Outside, the garden glimmered under a pale moon, and the world of polished manners and whispered gossip awaited them beyond the library's doors. Yet within the firelit space, a private dialogue had been established, fragile and electric, formed of gestures, words, and a shared recognition of both their vulnerabilities and strengths. At last, the Duke rose, a subtle signal that their private interlude was drawing to a close. He placed a hand lightly upon a small, delicate token, an ornate locket containing a pressed flower, before leaving it upon the table beside her. Lady Evelyn's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it, the weight of the object heavier than its physical substance suggested. It was a silent acknowledgement, a bridge between societal expectations and the unspoken intimacies that had begun to bloom in that firelit room. Rising to take her leave, Lady Evelyn felt the keen awareness of eyes that might follow, judgments that might whisper, yet she carried with her the quiet knowledge that the Duke's attention had been given with both discernment and care. Each step back toward the hall, where the ball continued, was taken with measured poise, a careful balance between the exhilaration of private connection and the vigilance required by social scrutiny. The encounter had shifted something fundamental within her, a sense that propriety and desire could coexist, that courage could manifest in both spoken word and silent acknowledgement, and that her life was quietly, irrevocably, beginning to change. The note, the flower, the locket, all small tokens, were threads woven into a tapestry of intrigue and possibility. Lady Evelyn carried them with a heightened awareness, each detail a reminder that the Duke's attention was not casual, and that the delicate dance of society's rules could coexist with moments of profound personal resonance. She returned to the ballroom with her head held high, the subtle blush upon her cheeks a testimony to the tension and thrill of their encounter. And in that moment, the whispered question that had begun the evening lingered still, a soft refrain that would shape every careful choice she would make. Why leave a lady this beautiful unchaperoned? The evening continued, yet Lady Evelyn's mind remained half in the ball and half in the private, firelit world where a Duke had observed her not as a subject of gossip, but as a woman of intelligence, courage, and beauty deserving of both attention and respect. The seeds of scandal, curiosity, and attraction had been sown, and their careful, deliberate growth promised a slow-burning tension that would unfold in ways neither could yet fully anticipate. The evening had deepened into a velvet darkness, the manor's grand chandeliers casting a soft, golden haze that trembled against the polished floors and gilded walls. Lady Evelyn moved with careful grace through the corridors, the locket left by the Duke resting against her heart, its weight a delicate reminder of their private connection. Each step echoed faintly in the quiet halls, and for a moment, she felt the world had narrowed to the spaces between walls and the warmth of the firelight spilling from distant rooms. The ball continued in its orchestrated splendor, a symphony of polite laughter and measured music, yet she had slipped away, driven by a longing she scarcely understood, a desire to find a place where her thoughts could speak freely and her heart could respond without scrutiny. The drawing-room, seldom used except for private meetings or quiet reflection, offered such sanctuary. A soft fire glowed in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced across tapestries and gilt-framed portraits. Lady Evelyn sank into an armchair of deep burgundy velvet, the fabric cool against the warmth of her gown, and allowed herself a moment of exhale. Her thoughts, tangled with curiosity and apprehension, returned again to the Duke, the intensity of his gaze, the precision of his words, the weight of his unspoken concern. How could one so powerful, so entrenched in the rigidities of society, see her in a way that felt both careful and complete? Footsteps approached, measured and deliberate. The Duke entered, the soft scrape of polished shoes upon stone announcing his arrival before his figure fully emerged from the shadows. He carried the air of command tempered by a restraint that never intruded, his presence filling the room without overwhelming it. His eyes, dark and discerning, held her attention as he closed the distance, pausing just beyond the subtle glow of firelight. "You find yourself seeking solitude," he observed, his voice low yet resonant. "Or perhaps, permission to think freely?" Lady Evelyn looked up, meeting his gaze with a mixture of apprehension and courage. "I suppose both, Your Grace," she answered, the formal title softening under the intimacy of the moment. Her voice, though measured, carried a tremor of honesty, a thread of vulnerability that she had seldom allowed herself in the presence of men of consequence. She realized, with quiet astonishment, that here, alone in the muted grandeur of the drawing-room, she could speak in ways that society would never permit. The Duke took a step closer, maintaining a careful distance that acknowledged propriety while inviting connection. "There are truths," he said, voice steady, "that are often whispered only in the spaces between judgment and expectation. I find it regrettable that such truths seldom reach those who deserve understanding most." His words were deliberate, their cadence both formal and intimate, designed to draw attention not merely to the moment but to the sincerity that underpinned it. Lady Evelyn felt a subtle warmth rise to her cheeks, a mingling of admiration, curiosity, and a budding trust that had not been present in their previous, more public encounter. A silence settled between them, neither forced nor uncomfortable, but pregnant with unspoken meaning. Lady Evelyn traced the edge of the locket with a gloved fingertip, the pressed flower within a fragile emblem of a moment shared, of attention granted and reciprocated. She spoke quietly, as though the room itself were listening. "It is extraordinary," she murmured, "to be seen without the shield of expectation, without the constant weight of judgment. It feels rare to speak freely and be heard." The Duke inclined his head slightly, a subtle acknowledgment of her words, his expression softened by a trace of empathy. "It is a rarity," he admitted, "yet not impossible. The world may constrain us, Lady Evelyn, but it does not define the truths of character or heart. I see you, not merely in beauty or compliance, but in the depth of thought and courage that others overlook." His eyes lingered upon her with an intensity that was measured yet compelling, and she felt, for the first time, a sensation that hovered between fear and fascination, a recognition that someone of power had acknowledged not only her presence but her essence. As the moments stretched, the emotional intimacy deepened, and Lady Evelyn felt the cautious stirrings of trust and longing. She discovered that she could speak of small joys, fleeting fears, and the delicate yearnings that had been stifled under societal expectation. The Duke listened, each nod, each measured pause, each carefully chosen word demonstrating attentiveness rather than dominance. He did not merely hear her, he witnessed her, a subtle distinction that carried the weight of understanding. In return, the Duke revealed fragments of himself, carefully selected truths that offered glimpses beyond the exterior of authority and decorum. He spoke of the solitude inherent in his position, of the burdens of expectation, and of moments of quiet yearning that were seldom shared or acknowledged. Each revelation, restrained though it was, deepened the fragile trust forming between them. Lady Evelyn recognized that attraction need not be declared boldly to be powerful. It could be woven in glances, in measured phrases, in the delicate symmetry of mutual understanding. A sudden flicker of movement at the window, a passing servant, a gust of wind catching the curtains, interrupted the intimacy, reminding them that even in secluded corners, the world's watchful eyes were never entirely absent. The Duke's expression remained composed, yet a subtle tension passed through his shoulders, an acknowledgment of the fragility of their moment. Lady Evelyn, heart quickened, understood the constraints that bound them, yet also felt the exhilaration of a connection that defied mere circumstance. The Duke stepped closer, just enough that the warmth of his presence brushed against the periphery of her awareness, careful still to honor propriety. "You possess a courage," he said, "that society seldom recognizes. And yet, I find myself compelled to acknowledge it, to ensure that such courage is neither overlooked nor diminished." His tone was formal, yet threaded with a rare intimacy that made each word tremble between restraint and earnest desire. Lady Evelyn's pulse responded in kind, a quiet acknowledgment of the tension that threaded their shared silence. He extended a hand toward the locket, his fingers brushing lightly against her gloved ones, a gesture that was both protective and deliberate. "Let this remain," he said softly, "a token not of possession but of recognition, that in a world quick to judge, you are seen, truly seen, and valued for all that you are beyond expectation." She accepted the gesture with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of intention in the delicate clasp, a symbol of connection that needed no words to convey its significance. The fire crackled, shadows swaying across walls lined with portraits of ancestors long gone, as if silently bearing witness to the delicate, unfolding intimacy. Lady Evelyn's heart beat with a careful rhythm, caught between fear, exhilaration, and the first unmistakable recognition of desire tempered by restraint. They had not yet crossed the bounds of propriety, yet within the quiet of the drawing-room, a bridge had been constructed, an unspoken promise that what began in attention and recognition could grow in the space between caution and courage. A sudden toll of the ballroom's distant clock reminded them of the passing hours, the inevitability of the world beyond this room pressing against the fragile intimacy they had nurtured. The Duke's gaze lingered upon her for a moment longer, full of unspoken questions and deliberate care, before he inclined his head in a subtle farewell. "Our conversation need not end here, Lady Evelyn," he said, voice low yet deliberate, "for moments such as these are rare and merit preservation." Lady Evelyn remained seated, fingers lightly brushing the locket, the press of the flower within a tangible echo of the evening's revelations. The private confession, the measured revelations, the acknowledgment of courage, the tender gestures, had shifted something fundamental. A connection had been established that defied both scandal and expectation, a slow-burning recognition of mutual regard, understanding, and the possibility of more. As the room settled into a quiet stillness, Lady Evelyn realized that she had crossed a threshold. The world of judgment and propriety remained beyond the doors, yet within the warmth of the drawing-room, she had discovered a space where words, glances, and gestures conveyed more than society could ever permit. And in that realization, she sensed the inevitability of a story unfolding between them, delicate yet insistent, bound by respect, desire, and the unspoken promise of recognition. The night stretched on, the distant music of the ball a faint echo, and Lady Evelyn understood that their interaction had set into motion a chain of events that would challenge, illuminate, and ultimately transform the contours of both their lives. The private confession had been made, the vulnerability exchanged, and with it, a slow-burning anticipation had been ignited, one that promised revelation, longing, and the careful negotiation of hearts poised between propriety and passion. The dawn broke over Ashcroft Manor with a muted brilliance, the soft light of morning spilling across the manicured gardens and gilded terraces, transforming familiar paths into a landscape of delicate luminescence. Lady Evelyn descended the grand staircase with measured grace, her gown of pale lavender trailing lightly against the polished stone, the folds catching the first golden rays of day. The events of the past evening weighed upon her mind. Small gestures, whispered acknowledgments, stolen glances, and the heavy sense of curiosity that had grown into a careful, persistent longing. Each step she took was deliberate, her heart a quiet drumbeat in anticipation of the confrontation she knew was inevitable. The Duke had summoned her, and propriety alone could not dictate the course of what was to come. The terrace door opened with a gentle click, revealing the Duke already waiting, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. The morning light softened the sharp lines of his countenance, casting a subtle warmth across his dark features. He regarded her with the same intensity she had come to recognize, tempered now with a calm that suggested deliberation rather than sudden desire. There was no trace of the public scrutiny that had shadowed their first encounter. Here, alone beneath the open sky, their interaction could unfold without constraint. "Lady Evelyn," he began, his voice low and measured, "the morning finds us at the precipice of propriety and truth. I trust you understand why I have requested this meeting." Her gloved hand rested lightly upon the balustrade, fingers brushing the smooth marble, a gesture both poised and contemplative. "I believe I do, Your Grace," she replied, her tone formal yet imbued with the quiet confidence that had grown within her over the course of their private encounters. Her gaze met his directly, unflinching, and the subtle warmth in her eyes conveyed both curiosity and readiness. She understood that the words spoken here would not merely define the morning. They would shape the trajectory of their lives, delicate as a ribbon, yet unbreakable once secured. The Duke stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to a space that was intimate without being intrusive. "I have observed, Lady Evelyn," he said carefully, "a courage in you that is rare, and a spirit that refuses to bend entirely to the caprice of society. Such qualities are remarkable, and demand acknowledgment beyond perfunctory courtesy." His words carried weight, both formal and intensely personal, a declaration in measured phrases rather than overt proclamation. Lady Evelyn felt a tremor of anticipation stir within her chest, a quiet echo of all that had passed in the firelit library and the shadowed corridors of the manor. She inclined her head slightly, a graceful acknowledgment that neither minimized nor exaggerated her own sense of worth. "Your recognition honors me, Your Grace," she said softly. "Yet I remain mindful that the world is rarely forgiving of attention that defies its expectations. It is not merely a question of feeling seen, but of preserving dignity amid judgment." Her voice was composed, yet the tremor beneath the surface betrayed the depth of emotion she had struggled to conceal. She understood that the Duke, for all his authority and social command, had chosen to navigate this delicate balance with care, a care that both intrigued and unsettled her. The Duke paused, his gaze sweeping the terrace as if ensuring that no intrusion would mar the moment, then returned fully to her. "Dignity," he said, "is not diminished by the acknowledgment of admiration. Rather, it is preserved when regard is offered with sincerity, and when intent is measured with consideration. I assure you, Lady Evelyn, that my attention is neither frivolous nor superficial. It is deliberate, and it is mine to offer without reservation." There was a subtle gravity in his words, a resonance that seemed to echo through the morning air and settle within the very marrow of her being. A soft breeze stirred the hem of her gown, and the locket, still clasped in her gloved hands, caught the morning light. She traced its edge delicately, recalling the flower pressed within, a tangible emblem of shared moments that had shifted the contours of their acquaintance into something more profound. "I am unaccustomed to such directness," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, yet rich with honesty. "It is not often that one finds admiration tempered with both restraint and understanding." Her eyes, luminous in the early light, held his, and in that silent exchange, a delicate equilibrium was established, a recognition that connection and propriety could coexist when approached with care and deliberate intent. The Duke inclined his head, a subtle acknowledgment of both her words and the courage they implied. "It is not common," he said, "yet rarity does not diminish value. I find that those who navigate life with discernment, who measure the weight of words and gestures, are deserving of attention that honors both their mind and heart. Lady Evelyn, it is my wish, if you would permit it, that we pursue this with honesty and care, acknowledging both the world's scrutiny and the truths of our own inclinations." His phrasing was formal, yet every syllable was charged with intent, an invitation veiled in the artful cadence of Victorian propriety. Her pulse quickened, a measured response to the gravity and intimacy of his declaration. She considered the words, the care with which he had chosen them, the deliberate merging of societal awareness and personal regard. "Your Grace," she said at last, her voice steady yet soft, "I accept your guidance not merely in protection but in understanding. Let our actions reflect both respect for the world we inhabit and acknowledgement of the truths we carry within." There was a serenity in her tone, a poised acceptance that balanced courage and propriety, signaling her willingness to meet him in the delicate space between desire and decorum. The Duke extended his hand, gloved and steady, a gesture that was formal yet intimate, bridging the distance between acknowledgement and shared intent. Lady Evelyn placed her own lightly upon it, the brief contact resonating with a quiet electricity, a testament to the unspoken agreements that had shaped their interactions. The warmth of connection was neither rushed nor audacious, but deliberate, a slow, purposeful recognition that signified mutual respect, burgeoning affection, and the inevitability of shared futures. Around them, the manor awoke in gentle motions, the servants beginning their duties, distant music from the previous evening fading into memory, and the garden bathed in the soft, gold-tinged light of a new day. Yet within the terrace, the world seemed suspended, honoring the delicate equilibrium of courage, restraint, and acknowledgement that had been carefully cultivated between them. Every shadow, every glint of sunlight upon the stone and glass, seemed to bear witness to the quiet intensity of this encounter. The Duke's eyes softened, reflecting both satisfaction and anticipation. "Let this day," he said, "mark the commencement of understanding, trust, and the careful navigation of both the world and our own inclinations. It is not merely a question of admiration, Lady Evelyn, but of partnership, acknowledgement and respect, woven with care and tempered with patience." His words, measured and resonant, carried an unspoken promise, a foundation upon which shared experiences and mutual regard could flourish despite societal constraints. Lady Evelyn nodded, a serene smile gracing her lips. "Then let it be so, Your Grace. Let us proceed with honesty, courage, and care, honoring both propriety and the truths that have drawn us together." The gesture was small, the words formal, yet the resonance between them was profound, a testament to the slow-burning intimacy that had developed through observation, acknowledgement, and measured attention. They remained in silence for a few moments, the morning sun bathing them in gentle warmth, the terrace a private sanctuary removed from the watchful eyes of society. The unspoken tension that had threaded their encounters now found resolution in deliberate acknowledgement, a careful balance of propriety and desire that promised further unfolding with patience and understanding. The locket, the flower, the measured words, they were all threads in a tapestry that would shape their shared story, delicate yet unbreakable, restrained yet inexorably powerful. As the morning progressed and the manor came fully alive, Lady Evelyn felt a quiet certainty settle within her, a recognition that the Duke's attention had been offered with both discernment and sincerity, and that their connection was not fleeting. With every deliberate step, every measured word, they had established a foundation built upon respect, understanding, and an acknowledgement of truths too often obscured by society's rigid gaze. And in that recognition, both knew that the course of their lives had been irrevocably altered. The question that had begun it all, why leave a lady this beautiful unchaperoned, finding its answer in the deliberate, respectful union of hearts and minds, poised to navigate both scrutiny and desire with care and courage.